Rain pattered on the outside of the window. It should have been soft, a calm, dull drowning out of thoughts melting down the face of a screen. Instead, it only added to the chaos inside her head. She was lying in bed, alone, as usual. She didn't used to have these thoughts. It used to be comforting. The silence, the quiet, her own space to do what she wanted. But no, not as late. She never thought it would happen like this. A few years ago, she was still back on her home planet. Due to a special deal with the AOS, she got onto Earth as a social research assistant, before their existence was even revealed to the rest of the wider galactic community. It was terrifying at first. Humans. Their homeworld. A monstrosity. She didn't think she would ever get used to it, but when you got down to it, it turned out there were a lot of similarities between them. Fear just clouded her judgment. She supposed she could say the humans reacted the same way. Fear left unattended could turn to prejudice, but nurtured with exposure could foster relationships better than those with your own species. She honestly found it amazing. As amazing as a monumentally important achievement, like when they first discovered life other than their own, much before she was born. Or at the same time, as amazing as a rotting corpse in the woods, which is to say not amazing. And it is also to say her opinions on certain situations could flip on a dime. It was an old stereotype of her species, that they were more neurotic and prone to manic episodes. But that was just a myth. They were no more prone than any other species. Okay, well, there were. But compared to humans, and a few other species on the AOS's species neuroticism scale, they weren't. But right now she didn't really care about that. She couldn't care less, actually. Over the past few weeks she'd gotten involved with a human. That made it sound like more than it actually was. What actually happened was that she'd gone stupid and caught feelings for a human male. It wasn't that intense at first, but it just kept growing and growing until she figured that, yes, she really did feel that way towards another species, and figured she should at least say something. It wasn't like he acted entirely disinterested, but just disinterested enough to where she didn't know. She had told him, and he had told her maybe. That was until 3 days later, when he told her no and that he didn't like her, and he was sorry for giving her hope. She thought it would be fine. Yeah, her people tended to love less than humans. When you felt that love towards another, it might have been the only time in your life you felt that way. Or it could have been the second, or the third, or very rarely the fourth. But no one ever just dated casually, or had a new crush of the week on her world. That was unheard of. You loved once, twice, maybe even 3 times, maybe even 4, but then that was it. And if you got lucky and found someone, you definitely never loved again after that. If you two broke up, which was unheard of, so it was basically not even a possibility, or one of you died, tough luck. There was no one else for you. She knew that wasn't really how it worked with humans, so she tried to be understanding. She also knew she had been rejected multiple times, so she should have moved on by now. Despite her natural predisposition, most of her people had a relatively easy time moving on. Obviously you loved the person who rejected you, right? So you'd respect their decision and stop feeling that way, right? She made a sound of what could only be described as pathetically pitiable, and picked up her phone trying to taper the urges. She thought it would be fine. For the first few months, it was fine. But getting over this love was like a drug, or what she imagined getting over a drug must feel like. She sometimes just got these urges to think of him, to even just talk to him. She couldn't explain what it did for her, but she just wanted to hear his voice and see his text on the screen, even though she knew it meant less than a grain of sand being swept away by the wind. Most of the time she managed to ignore the urges, and they went away. This time, she was too sad and lonely, wallowing in self-pity, to take her mind off of it. They used to be friends, right? So it wasn't out of the ordinary if she just sent him one tiny little text. Hi, I was scrolling through my photos and found a picture of everyone when we were having lunch. Thought I would share it. Lol. She was, in fact, not scrolling through her photos at the time. She had that picture for a while now. It was a photo where everyone in their friend group was posed laughing at something stupid. She waited, and waited, and waited, and finally set down her phone and shoved her face into the pillow below her. Having a bed actually took a while to get used to. They didn't have beds with pillows and blankets on her world, but by now she had decided that they were actually quite comfortable. Well, she would be thinking they were quite comfortable if she wasn't instead thinking of how embarrassing and sad she was being right now. Why did she even send that message? Of course it's going to be weird. He barely even wants to interact with her in their friend group, let alone outside it. He clearly wants nothing to do with her. Why was she being this way? A notification chimes and she picks up her phone again. That small fix, that itch that always seems to need scratching, soothed. His reply was short but sweet, polite, and she knew she shouldn't continue, and she knew this should be the end, but she couldn't help herself. Over the next hour, her time was entirely spent just texting him. They did have chemistry, in a friend sort of way, before everything happened, so it wasn't like she was grasping at straws, desperately trying to continue the conversation. Though at some point, it shifted. Somehow their thing was brought up and things were uneasy again. "I'm sorry if me texting you makes you uncomfortable. I don't mean anything by it." She damn well meant something by it. And he must have known that too, because a few messages later, "I'm sorry for what I did, but I don't like you, and I don't feel comfortable continuing this way with you. I'm sorry." She read the message over and over again. Simple text on the screen. Meaningless. It should have been expected, after all. She knew all this time since the very first time he rejected her. Yes, he led her on at first. Led her on for a few days before he stopped. But that's just it. He led her on for a few days. It shouldn't have been enough to warrant her still feeling this way after several months, almost bordering on a year now. Especially after he rejected her not once, not twice, but 4 times. Well, maybe not 4 times, technically 3. But she counted him blatantly telling her he liked another girl as a 4th rejection. It certainly felt like a rejection. Yet why? Why couldn't she move on? She was stuck. She didn't know why she was stuck, why her mind wouldn't allow her to be unstuck. And clearly he didn't want her. And clearly he was uncomfortable even being around her, because she just couldn't stop being weird. Yet she still tried, even for the smallest scraps of attention, even as friends. Every time it sent daggers into her heart, every time she simply couldn't comprehend why she felt this way. But she knew what the consequence of all this was. She cried. Not exactly in the same way a human could, but it was all the same. Cry for what she couldn't have, and what would never be, from which she just couldn't let go from. She could never come up with words potent enough to explain the rock in her chest every time she thought about it. Sometimes it was nice to avoid the reality of the situation, pretend like maybe it could have been and still could be a different way. Other times she liked to get mad, indignant, at herself, at him. It didn't matter. But it always came back to that deep sadness and despair, for no other reason than her biology convinced her that she should be feeling this way. Really, she was fine before this. Before this, she didn't even think having a partner would suit her. So why did things have to be like this? Why? She pulled the covers over her head again and closed her eyes, letting the blackness consume her, and her thoughts run more rampant. If only, maybe, if they only could have... No, it was meant to. But still, why? She didn't want... It wasn't supposed to... It hurt. Nothing worked. Nothing ever soothed the pain. Distracted her, yes, but ever healed the scab she seemed to be constantly and unknowingly picking at? No. All over one single guy. One stupid human. It wasn't that big of a problem. It shouldn't have even been a problem. She should have really been able to just move on, to stop obsessing over it. Really, it was one singular person who did not give a single fuck about her. So why did she still give one singular fuck about him? More than a singular fuck, too many to count. She lay there for a while, her thoughts continuing to spiral down. The sadness giving way to exasperation, giving way to despair, giving way to anger, giving way to hatred. They would never truly last, as the hatred and anger would only give way to sadness and hopeless love, and the cycle would repeat again. Stuck, and still stuck, with no way to get unstuck. Someone else looking in might have disagreed, but she felt like she'd already tried everything. Every single thing she could think of, every single thing a friend had suggested, and she told them it was fine, if only to not let the shame of what they would think of her continue if she were to tell them the truth. The truth. The truth was that nothing was ever going to happen, and she was never going to get what she wanted. Like a petulant child throwing a temper tantrum, the universe responded in kind by shutting her down and disciplining her like a parent. A continuous stream of consciousness that never ended. Why? She closed her eyes and eventually everything went black. For once, the thoughts stopped. She stopped. The rain continued to pour outside. A few weeks later, she met up with some friends. Her emotions had been as usual. Think about him, forget about him, remember and be sad again. The unfortunate thing about her social circle, though, he was there, and was included. No one knew because she didn't want to ruin things, or tell anyone about her and his weird deal, just to start drama and whatever, when they had already resolved the situation behind closed doors. So for the majority of the hangout, they interacted politely, like any friends would. They had lunch first, at a place specifically for different species like her, which accommodated a wider variety of food that she and other species could actually eat. And as it turned out, new and exotic food was popular among humans anyways. Then they went roller skating. Then they went back to one of their houses. And talked. And talked. She tried her best. She really did. But eventually and inevitably, she'd always make a comment to him, make a joke or a loose remark, and he'd respond, out of politeness or something else she didn't know, but it made her feel better. It soothed the itch, temporarily, and oh so fleetingly. At some point, everyone else had gone to a separate room to look at something, which just left him and her. The conversation was polite. She thought it would stay polite, maybe even fizzle out, because she was sure he would probably leave to avoid the horrible awkwardness of talking to someone as idiotic as her. But of course she just had to run her stupid mouth. "I'm sorry. I know I've been weird, you know?" And he responded, "Yeah, you haven't been that weird. It's still kind of my fault. I understand. You probably should hate me after all of this. I wouldn't care if you did, but I wouldn't be surprised." He smiled and then laughed. And she didn't laugh. She didn't smile. She just stared. She didn't even comprehend what was said. Didn't even comprehend how she was supposed to feel. Though maybe somewhere in her subconscious she did, which sparked the next line of conversation. "I wonder what you would look like if I cut you." He looked at her strangely. She usually would never make a comment like that, but not that I want to just... I wonder how you would respond if I blackmailed you. Would you hate me then? Or would you still just be apathetic towards my existence? He raised an eyebrow and fidgeted with his hands weirdly. What? Is that an actual question, or... I wonder what it would be like if I slit your fucking throat and watched you bleed out on the floor. They stared at each other. He stared at her. She stared at him. Everyone came back and the conversation returned back to normal. And she drove home that night. She was planning to stay the night, maybe, but not with him there. It was only then that she had a strange thought. She couldn't drive. Not a human vehicle. Not just not drive, she couldn't roller skate either. How did she? She caught a reflection in the window of the car she never owned. It was his face looking at her. Of course, she knew now. She'd never say any of those things in real life. Those unprompted thoughts that came only as a result of how obsessive she was. She stepped out of the car and walked across the street. There was no traffic, none at all, but it was raining. But she didn't even feel the rain. She didn't feel anything. On the side of the street there was a door. She opened it and it led to a completely black room. She walked for a while. The room was so big. It never seemed to end. After a while of walking, she finally found something inside the room. It held nothing but a ladder and a rope in the middle. She'd never contemplate this in reality, but here in this dream, she was just so curious and disconnected. She climbed up the ladder, wrapped the rope around her neck, and did something which should have been impossible given her inhuman anatomy, but she kicked the ladder back and dropped down. Do you remember Woe? Oh, yes, the alien girl. He tried to sound casual, but really, the mention of her name brought up a lot of awkward memories. It wasn't her fault. It was his, kinda. But still, it made him feel uncomfortable with the guilt and the sheer awkwardness she tended to exhibit. He did hope she'd find someone else one day. Just not him. Wait, you only knew her for a few days before we both moved away. Why are you bringing her up? Her phone was tilted down so he could see a news website with Woe's face. She died in her sleep a few months ago. Really unfortunate. His eyes widened and he shook his head, unsure of what he just heard. Wait, but her species? The pitiable, they don't sleep? No, they don't. It was classified at first, you know. One of the few aliens in our world just suddenly dying was something her homeworld wasn't too happy about. But now it's all over the news. The headlines say she died in her sleep, but if you look further it says she actually passed out due to unknown reasons and just died. He didn't know what to say. He hadn't thought of her much since that, but he didn't wish she was dead. Still, it wasn't like he was emotionally invested in her, even as a friend. He wished he could have said he cared more, but really, he just didn't. That's really, really sad. I hope her family and friends are okay. He sounded more unsure and sad than he really was, and they talked about her death for a little while before going back to their usual routine. He thought about it one last time, the last time in his entire life he'd think about her again, when he was going to sleep that night. It was really unfortunate, yeah, but it wasn't really any of his concern either way. He turned off the lights and went to bed. He wondered what the weather was going to be like tomorrow. Hopefully not rainy. He had to work outside, and he did not want to get soaked tomorrow.